Well, Kristy, I have to start back to school after break tomorrow. And as I look at my lesson plan book, I'm thinking it's hard to go from zero to back to school.
Oh,
We don't
I
even
know.
get that built-in teacher day buffer. It's
Hmm.
new semester, so I'm getting new students in my Spanish 2 class, and I'm a little uh, I don't know, exhausted already thinking about it. And so as we talk today, I just thought we'd talk through some things because I'm sure other people are in that same position. Ways to make acquisition driven instruction a little less teacher driven.
Hmm.
We're in charge of the input. We want to make sure they get great input, but how do we not have to be the one man show all the time?
Yeah, I know. I feel like when it's time to come back to school after a break, it's almost traumatizing.
Yes.
I always feel like, how can I make this the least traumatic, the least dreadful experience for both myself and the students? Because, they've been staying up super late. They're going to be like coming in unprepared to be learners. Same with teachers. We probably have been having fun for a couple of weeks and not really ready to be back. And I think in a way, it helps us to kind of get our minds back in the mode of school when we know we've prepared some things to kind of make that reentry a little bit more gentler for everyone. It's kind of a psychological thing, I think, when you know that you're okay, I have to go back tomorrow, but it's not going to be crazy. I've planned some really nice activities that are going to be low key, relaxing, and my students are still going to be getting input. So I think that just to help everybody get their mind in that kind of a mindset after a break, it's so helpful to plan these types of activities where you feel like you're building in a little bit of downtime for yourself.
Yes, and that's the key in this second semester because I feel like first semester goes so fast
Hmm.
because you have so many breaks and then you hit second semester, or even if you have a couple weeks in exams and then
Hmm.
second semester hasn't started yet, after you come back from Christmas break, the vacation days just dry up. And
Oh,
so
I
it's a
know.
long haul through the winter. So finding that balance of how do I make this sustainable where I am on to
Hmm.
give the main content of the lesson, but then I'm sort of you know giving them some autonomy too
Hmm.
as they work with the input so that I don't have to be on all day every day because that would just be exhausting to think about at this point, 18
Right.
more weeks of
And also, let's face it, once your students have some time behind them in an acquisition driven classroom, they can handle being kind of the masters of their own acquisition process from time to time. The teacher can become more of a facilitator and not always the sole source of language. And I think really, if you're in the first semester of level one, it's tough because you really are kind of the fountain of everything that your students get.
yes.
But I think the sooner you can move towards some things where you're not always their sole source of comprehensible input, it's it's not only nice for the teacher, but it's nice for them too. And they can have a chance to interact with some texts and maybe hear some people speaking the language that are not the teacher. And it's just a nice place for everybody to get to.
And really, what we see in research is that once they hit that middle intermediate line, they
Hmm.
don't need a teacher anymore to continue
Hmm.
to improve in their language. So, if we can really push the input into them and get them started on that road down intermediate, we can help give them also the skills to once I
Hmm.
hit this, feeling of being able to communicate with my new language,
Hmm.
now I can go on and learn without you. So they don't feel like
Right.
leaving our classroom means leaving the language behind.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so nice too because then our job kind of becomes like we're more like the cruise director and the motivational person kind of cheering them on. We don't have to be like the be all end all source of all language and all knowledge.
Yes. So, what are some ways that you've used in your classroom to take a step back from? I know that when the content is brand new, sometimes you do have to, story tell a little bit, or you have to do some kind of a presentation of the content where you're the center. But there are also times when the content may be something they're familiar with, they just don't know, they haven't seen it all conglomerated together under a theme.
Right.
So sometimes there are passive ways to even introduce content. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes we can do the same activities that we might normally do where the teacher's on, but do them in a slightly different way so that the teacher can kind of take a step back. So, the first one that comes to my mind during the time that we were learning differently during COVID, I got to the point where I was doing a lot of creating videos for my students, and I would often just put the video in Google Classroom for them to do something with it, or put it in an ed puzzle. And I know you mentioned that you use Nearpod. Using something like that to
And Pear Deck is another good one for the
Pear
same
Deck,
type of.
yep. So just maybe introducing some material using a video of myself, but then I can use that same video for all of my preps. And I know that when my students first came back to school, and I'm sure this is not a unique experience, but when my students first came back to school after our school had been shut down for a while, it was really challenging getting them to really focus and want to listen. And sometimes I found that by creating a little video lesson, even though it was still me, it was kind of odd, but they would pay more attention sometimes to when it was on a video than when I was doing the lesson live. So
that's so funny that you say that, because this year at ACTFL, Kristy and I were supposed to go on Wednesday night, and my husband ended up being sick, and so we pushed our trip back and left Thursday. So I had already made video lessons. When I'm gone for a couple days, I try to leave video lessons so that we don't get too far behind in class. I had left these video lessons, and I thought, man, I don't want to waste these videos. I spent 45 minutes making it. So in Spanish 4, I went ahead and played the video with me there, and it was so funny to see the difference in, like, when you're presenting just regularly to class versus when they're watching you on TV.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, I don't know if I should be offended.
Right. And I think if you did it all the time, the shine would wear off that too. But,
yes.
When you do it some of the time, it's a little bit of novelty for them. I'm not going to name any names here, but I do have another colleague who had done some really great lesson plans prior to going to ACTFL. And one of the days that she was at ACTFL, her school was not able to get a sub for her students, so they ended up just kind of hanging out all day in the auditorium or something, and not having a teacher. So they didn't do any of the lessons that she had left. And she's like, "I'm taking a sick day next week because I made these nice lessons,
and I want
these
my
nice sub plans." So you don't want to waste those good sub plans,
No, they're too good. They take too long.
Yeah.
And somehow it never works out that ACTFL. I always try to be careful, like, not to call out specific students' names or anything, like, hey, did you answer that, Shamir, or whatever. But
right.
So that if it happens that we're in the same place the next year, I could use but I've never had a time that I was doing the same thing. I always have to make a new video.
I have found I've made some videos of me doing some movie talk activities, and I've also done it with map talk activities. And I actually have been able to recycle those from year to year because it's literally just me either telling a story or describing something. So, if you're super ambitious, you could even record some things like that and just kind of have them on hand. for whenever you may need to be out, or when you just have one of those days where you're like losing your voice or whatever, and you could just have some things on hand. But I don't know. I don't know too many teachers who are like that organized that they can like plan
Right.
plan ahead just
Pre-make
to have a
some
bunch.
video.
It always sounds really good when you say it, but then in reality, it's tough to do that. So
It is.
so we were, you and I were kind of talking about we were kind of brainstorming like all the different types of activities that we would tend to do with our students. And we were talking about like what could we do to make that feel like the teacher is a little less on. And one of the ones that we brought up was storytelling, because that tends to be, especially if you're doing like story asking where you're co-creating a story with your students, that to me tends to be one of the most on types of activities that I could possibly do, because not only are you physically up and talking with your students, but you're also having to be extremely creative, and you're also trying to balance all these different responses from kids, and you're also trying to make sure that their responses are appropriate. And do I have to go check Urban Dictionary, or what are they talking about here? So to me, that is one of the most like high key types of activities that we do as teachers. So how do you handle something like that? What if you're wanting to do a story of some kind? Do you have any little hacks for how you can make that happen?
Well, my colleague Kristy and I are doing the same curriculum. We use the same curriculum in level 1 and 2. And we're very different because I think on my feet really fast, and I don't mind crawling around on the floor and barking like a dog, or making a kid act like a seal or whatever. Chrissy doesn't feel comfortable doing that kind of stuff. And so we have found that what works great for us is that we have a script. Whatever the story is going to be, we have a set script, and then she can take that script and use it just to tell a story. Like, she might ask her students to contribute what the name of the person is, but basically, she has a script. The kids have a script. She's kind of going through this story with them. She might have them act out a little part of it. But for her, she's not going to go down there and, pretend she's Brandon's dog pooping on the floor. So I, on the other hand, will,
Right.
be standing on a chair in the middle of the room when the admin comes in. And so one year the admin came in, and I had there was a bank robbery going on, and all the students are laying on the floor because they've been told to get on the floor. And it just, it's different. So her way is a lot more low key and relaxing. And so when I have days that I just feel like today I cannot, like, I'm not going to roll around on the bear, make the superintendent a mermaid today. I am going to tell the story just as it is on here. And, maybe we tell the story as it is and we draw along with it and do a sketch note kind of thing, a la Martina Beck's. But that's one way that you can, even on a high energy thing like storytelling, it doesn't have to be, with you as the sideshow. It can be you just delivering good quality input in your own way.
Yeah. And, bringing up you versus your colleague, Chrissy, it reminds me that one of the things that I hear all the time from other teachers is that they don't feel like they have the right personality to teach, quote, this way. And I always tell teachers, you don't have to have any certain type of personality. This way of teaching does not have to be over the top. I mean, I think a lot of people tend to see different workshop presenters that, if you're going to be out presenting workshops, you probably have a fairly outgoing personality.
Yes.
But not everyone who teaches with comprehensible input is out there, jumping around and acting silly all the time. And this totally can be done by anyone with any type of personality. I mean, I always think of one of my wonderful colleagues who teaches Mandarin, Diane Neubauer. And I know you know Diane as well.
Yes.
And I know she actually teaches online Mandarin classes
Diane
too,
would
if
also
anyone.
probably not crawl around on the floor.
No, I can't imagine that she would. I mean,
Yeah.
I've watched Diane teach, and she has the most, like, she's just like Zen. She just has the most
Yes.
peaceful mannerisms. Her voice is just very soothing and quiet, and she's just a peaceful type of person. And
That's how I feel about Chrissy. And the
yeah.
students respond to that. You have to think, like,
Hmm.
I do have some students who would join me down there crawling around on the floor, but
Right.
there are other students who really are that quiet person that
Hmm.
doesn't even, it makes them uncomfortable to see me rolling around on the floor.
Yeah.
So, there's a place for all of us and all of our styles.
And I think when you try to go outside of your comfort zone, it's not your comfort zone, so you're not going to feel good about it. I think when you're teaching, you have to learn how to teach and be yourself. You can't always try to
Yes.
go imitating other people that are nothing like you. If you're Carrie Toth and you're trying to imitate Diane Neubauer, it's just not going to work for you because that Carrie
No.
Toth has to come out.
Yeah. I also, sometimes the story especially as you get into upper levels, I find that we do a lot of story based or clip chat based units in our level 1 and 2, or reader
Hmm.
based units, things that are designed around that core idea of being able to narrate a story, because that's
Right.
so important. Like, that's the
Hmm.
foundation of all communication, is
Hmm.
for us to be able to tell stories to each other. And so
Right.
that's why we do all those things. But then as we get into a point where the kids have a lot of language, we can start to add in more, deep thought kind of things. And
Hmm.
sometimes when you get into units like that, we just finished a unit on activists and the different platforms they're famous people who are standing up for different causes
Hmm.
that they support. And we did, to learn about Ricky Martin, we did centers,
Hmm.
because they already know, they've heard Ricky Martin songs, they're familiar with his music, they know who he is. So this gives them, they got to see him in Menudo, and they got to see
Hmm.
him in one of the soap operas he was in when he
Hmm.
was a kid. Barcos de Papel, I think it was called. But they have all these different little centers where they're learning a
Hmm.
little more about him. And I don't have to, it's all input, but they're
Right.
intermediates now. So they're soaking up all that
Hmm.
information and making meaning from it in their small groups instead of me being the ringleader.
Right. And one idea that I actually got this idea from you, and I know you do this all the time. When you set up different centers for the students to go around to, um, one thing that's nice about it is you can break the students into smaller groups. So they're just working with this one group of kids as they go around to all the centers. But then I know that you have one center where you sit and have a discussion with each group of students that comes in. And from the first time I tried that, I absolutely loved it. And I found that the students really enjoyed that center as well, because they like to use the language, and they also like to have a little bit of attention from their teacher. So I found that was, I didn't feel on. I didn't feel stressed. It was just a small group of kids coming over to talk to
Yeah.
me. It was a really satisfying way to spend a day, in my opinion.
It is. I agree. And that center, I will sometimes pre-write some questions just so I don't have to think on the spot of what we're going to
Right.
talk. But we do a
Hmm.
unit about eating. So I might be just trying to figure out what their typical
Hmm.
day eating habits. Like, do you eat breakfast? And it's
Hmm.
always funny to see them be like, "Yeah, I eat breakfast," and then 5 kids, "No, I don't eat breakfast," and then the
Yeah.
one kid that does says, "What? You don't eat breakfast? Breakfast is important." So it's a fun center because it's such a small group, and you just don't get that in classes.
Yeah.
Like, we have 20 to 30 to 35. Some of you, I'm sure, have
Hmm.
really big
Hmm.
classes. But they pick that one. Like, you only have to go to 4 of these 6 centers, but they will fight to get into the center with
Yes.
you because
Yeah. Which is so sweet.
it is.
So another type of activity that you and I had talked about, and this is kind of a no-brainer, but reading. Reading is something
Yeah,
we do
definitely.
almost every day. To me, it
Yes.
is a natural way of building downtime into your period, and um, you can do independent reading. You can have your students do some free choice reading at the beginning of each hour, or maybe at the beginning of each of the hour, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And that type of a systemic, we're going to do this on these days, that scheduled activity, that's a great way to just naturally build in some little breaks for yourself throughout the week. And I know that I just really
I do
appreciate
Tuesday,
having that little bit
Thursday.
of time. Yeah.
Yes. Because I read too with them, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just such a calming way to start the period those two
Yeah.
days.
And if you think about it, if I remember correctly, I think you have 6 classes a day that you
Yes.
teach, and I had 5. So if we're reading even 5 minutes every class period, that gives me almost a
Yeah.
half hour of reading time for
Yes.
myself. So it's a great little break. Writing is another one. If you once a week or even once a month, if you do a 10-minute free write, that gives you some time to even grade a few papers, take attendance, take a breather, drink a coffee.
Absolutely.
So now that's output. That's okay though, because that's a way that you're assessing your
If it,
students.
yeah,
And
it's 10 minutes, so
yeah,
you got
yeah,
plenty of input time.
yeah.
I
So
think that reading, even as part, like separate reading, like sustained silent reading, is
mhm,
awesome. But also within a unit, I try to every unit, like if we do a clip chat, we might do the
mhm,
movie talk, and that does usually require more of me being the
mhm.
center. But then after you've done that movie talk, you can do a retell day where you have slides that have
Yep.
little pieces of information where you're,
Mhm.
reading together with the students. And you can do that even as a Nearpod or as a Pear Deck or
Mhm.
Ed Puzzle. And then we have a day where we read the story, like with a little more detail. Like we've given him a
Right.
name and we've found out some more background information. And so
Mhm.
I can set them to reading that on their own. I can read it with them, whatever works
Mhm.
best for the class, but I don't have to be like creating something or
Right.
super active or rolling around on the floor.
Right. And I think, like, for me, that's kind of the bottom line is just having some activities built in where you're not as much on, and you're not having to police the room quite as much. And I feel
Yes.
like with reading, um, it's pretty easy for you as the teacher to kind of monitor the room, and you're not having, there's just not opportunities for students to have like outbursts. Not that, okay, maybe not outbursts, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
Blurting types of things, those little things that like take your energy away. It's just a few minutes where they're on task. It's really easy to monitor the class and they're getting input. And that's just kind
Yes.
of like the golden combination when you have all those things happening.
Yes, it definitely is.
So I think the last thing that you and I had discussed, as far as activities with a little less teacher being on, um, using the internet and videos in
Yes.
particular, right? So,
Yes, I have a lot of units that I use that are based
mhm,
around Duolingo podcasts
mhm,
and around the AJ Plus Espanol videos on
mhm,
YouTube because when you have a video that's geared toward that intermediate proficiency, it doesn't
mhm,
work quite as well with like a level 1 or 2 because they still need a lot of teacher input. But level three
mhm,
and four, when they're getting in that intermediate zone, they can take a video that's designed to target that intermediate audience and listen and use the visual
mhm.
clues on the screen, and they can really make meaning out of it. And so we could spend on a Duolingo podcast, we could spend 30 to 35 minutes of a class just listening to a 3-minute segment and answering questions about it, where they
Mhm.
have to listen like 3 times to get all of the
Right.
answers to the questions.
And a tool that I really like to use is Edpuzzle. And what's cool about Edpuzzle is you can take a YouTube video and work with the video. You don't have to download anything. You just work with the video through Edpuzzle. And if there's something in the video that I know is going to not be comprehensible for my students, I can actually add a little note right there at that point in the video.
Oh,
And
nice.
it explains whatever it is that I know is going to trip them up. So I can kind of anticipate where they're going to get stuck and just leave them a little note there. Or I can ask some questions about whatever it is that they're listening to or watching. And I can ask open-ended questions, or I can make them like multiple choice or true false. I kind of like to ask open-ended questions because it's a little harder for them to fudge their way through it if they have to answer
Yes,
something that's open-ended.
absolutely.
So I like to ask like an opinion questioner, and even using English, just asking them
Yes.
what they think about something that's going on in the video.
Because then they have to show that they really understood it and not
Yeah,
just
exactly. Yeah. And I'm always trying to find ways to get around all the various ways that they can use technology to cheat their way through. So we always have to try to stay one step ahead of them. So another YouTube channel that I really like, and I know you use it too, is the Dreaming Spanish YouTube channel. It's fantastic. It's deliberately very easy language, easy for students to follow along. It's very repetitive. I feel like Pablo, the guy that runs the channel, knows what he's doing.
Yes, we use it in Spanish too, because in Spanish 3, they're going to watch Internado Laguna Negra, which is all Spanish with Spanish subtitles. So having Pablo's show all through Spanish 2 really gets them ready, gets their listening ear trained to listen to somebody who's not really giving them a translation bit by bit, more just like showing through visual clues.
Yeah, 100%. And then we didn't want to leave the French teachers out. So I also wanted to mention Alice Ayel. Her videos are also designed for people who are learning the language, and they're a slower pace. They're very comprehensible. And if you know of anything for other languages, we'd love to hear from you so we can mention it to our listeners. So I think that just about wraps us up for today.
I think so too.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you again, Carrie, and I hope your return back to school goes really well.
Me too.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.